Good morning, thank you, or good afternoon, good evening to all of those who are joining us. I hope you can hear me okay. I sometimes have issues with the audio on this machine, so we'll hopefully it will go well. I appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. Excuse me. And you may be wondering why someone like me would be participating in this town hall. As you heard, I've spent nearly 39 years working for the U.S. Department of State and representing the U.S. government overseas, primarily in Africa on issues of interest to Africa related to development, conflict resolution, advancement of human rights, and other promotion of democracy, as well as looking at issues of global health. I started my career in Yaoundé in 1981 and was there at the time that President Paul Biya came to office. So I was able to, and I have watched over the last 38 years, the trajectory that the country has taken with all of its problems, and have followed with great interest and great sorrow the developments of the recent past. And ongoing conflict in southern Cameroon. I understand, therefore, the concerns of those of you who are participating in this town hall, but I am not here today to provide answers in terms of what is the best way forward related to Cameroon, but rather to provide a little bit of insight, I hope, into how diplomatic efforts could be undertaken or might be undertaken to help resolve the problem, or resolve the situation once and for all. I don't have easy answers because this is something that will take time no matter what. But I want to focus, and I'm not here to prescribe solutions, because the decision about what the future of Cameroon or the Cameroons should be and what the future of the Southern Cameroonians should be is really in your hands. And ultimately, you are the ones who must determine that. But there are two sort of main themes I think I'd like to focus on today. I'll make some brief remarks, and then I'm happy to take your questions, which may help direct this in a way that's more useful to you. So I want to talk a little bit about some advice on diplomatic engagement, how to focus on primarily the necessity to develop a unified and coherent message and goal, as well as, and then secondly, how you can take, once that is done, how you can find allies and build coalitions to help move forward and achieve whatever that objective may be. Ultimately, diplomacy, which often receives a bad rap, is really is the art of the possible. It is not about conceding everything to someone. It is about building and maintaining relationships.
I don't know whether she went
and
by internet. You go pay.
It means also creating environments and opportunities to discuss difficult issues. So everyone seems to think that diplomacy often means, that diplomatic engagement often means not telling the truth and not being candid. Nothing could be further from the truth. You need to be able to discuss issues and lay everything on the table, but it must be done in a way that removes as much as possible the emotion from the issue and focuses on the facts and identifying possible ways forward. So it is absolutely critical that it includes civil discourse, but looking at the very difficult issues and trying to break them down and identify what solutions might be. Now, I know that you have heard from a number of different speakers. For example, Dr. Amos Sawyer, who spoke at the last town hall, spoke a lot about the experience of Liberia and how an end was brought to the civil war in that country after a number of years. And it's important to look at these situations and understand what and how conflict has been resolved in other countries, But at the end of the day, every country is different, every situation is different. And while those examples can be instructive, they are not necessarily applicable broadly to every single situation. But what I also want to stress is that as you look at conflicts across the continent of Africa, for example, and where things have moved forward, diasporas have played a very important part. And so they can have an influence, they can have an impact, they can make a difference in helping to raise the profile of an issue, creating a constituency, a global alliance, and creating pressure for resolution of the problem. So I think that you are all on the right track for starting out to have a conversation and try to look at what you might be able to do, understanding that it will be a long process and there are many things that need to happen. But I would encourage you to look at sort of some of the examples out there, what the Ethiopian diaspora has done over many, many years. They are well organized, they have a voice, they have a hearing from people in government, which is important. And that has been the case in other situations as well. So there are the two separate issues, as I mentioned. One is to talk first about how one develops a coherent message, a unified objective. It's critical that ultimately there be a clear list of demands or an end state. Sorry, I'm getting a message that says my speaker, am I okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay. Much better now. The crackle is gone.
Sorry, I had a technical glitch. Apologies. So first, the issue of developing a coherent message and objective. Obviously, in any crisis situation, there are often many points of view. There are lots of emotions at play because there are a lot of things happening that generate those emotions and create different points of view. But what needs to happen first is there need to be internal mechanisms within the group to hear what people are interested in, to hear what their desires are, to hear what their issues are. But this cannot simply remain a talk shop. It's important to give people a platform to discuss issues, but at some point, there must be a process in place to distill the long list of desires and demands into more concrete and actionable items. What is articulating what the end goal is, articulating the multiple steps or the things that are minimal that need to be accomplished. You need to identify leaders who represent the various constituencies and points of view, but those leaders must be careful not to try to impose their own views. They need to be representative. And so, apologies. Can you hear me? I'm hearing that my speaker's not working.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you over the noise. Yes.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I apologize for the noise. There's nothing going on here. So
no, the little crackle is in the system.
Sorry. Thank you. So it is important that those who become the leaders of this group truly are representing the main points of view and are doing this in a unified way. Now, it is important, however, that these differing points of view be respected. And that's why it cannot be a situation where people are simply shouting at one another or demeaning or abusing others, because every viewpoint has value. But ultimately, if there is a solution to be found to the problem, then it needs to be worked through and it needs to be discussed, and ultimately decisions will have to be made by the group about what's the best way forward. To move forward, ultimately, unity and agreement on purpose is absolutely critical, because if there are too many viewpoints, too many groups, unclear objectives, it will be detrimental to actually making progress. Because at the end of the day, resolution of an issue takes a minimum of at least two sides to resolve. And if there are too many groups, it becomes extremely difficult to look to some sort of a solution. Ultimately, it is important that one has to negotiate to some degree at an appropriate point in time. But obviously, you need willing parties in order to bring them to the table to at least begin those discussions. Violence, ultimately, in the face of violence, really will not bring peace about. But it's hard to get there, I understand, when the violence is happening, is ongoing, and unlikely to change in the short term. But this issue of distilling points of view, creating a clear list of ideas and objectives is something that takes time, particularly when people have different points of view. And so the trick is to start now, because it will take time to get to that point. Now, the second main issue I'd like to focus on is that of finding champions and allies and building coalitions, because ultimately a small group will not be able to force a change or bring about a change or bring about a resolution without assistance. While the Southern Cameroonians need to be the most determinant voice in terms of what they want in their future and their future status, it will be extremely difficult to get to that point without the assistance of allies and others who can help advance the issue. So talking internally, creating unity of messaging and objectives is important. It is absolutely important also to look externally to those that can help you cast a spotlight on the issue and help you in your process to find a solution. Now, who you target and who you work with will depend to a certain extent on what it is your objectives and messages are. And they will change over time depending on where you are in the process of trying to move forward. I know that Dr. Maggie Kilo spoke to the group a few weeks ago about many mechanisms that exist within the international system and structures. And so I don't need to go through that again, and she is probably far more well-versed on that than I am. But those are options out there of places that ultimately can provide some help in moving through conflict, in resolving a conflict. But I just want to touch briefly on some possible allies to consider, and again, ones that should be considered at different points in time. The African Union will absolutely be important to be involved in whatever process goes forward. So working to some extent with the organization's peace and stability mechanisms will be critical. I realize that there are a lot of issues surrounding working with the African Union, not the least of which is that many of the decisions of the organization are made by the sitting presidents or sitting heads of state of governments. And of course, given the situation in Cameroon, therein lies part of the problem. And many African leaders, as we know, are reluctant to criticize or move against their own, except in certain circumstances. But again, it still means that one has to try to find a way to get a hearing and find some standing and raise the issues of concern in that forum and through the various different bodies of the African Union. Because ultimately, if, as I know there is a sentiment, if there is this desire for self-determination and or full independence, whatever that is defined as, the African Union will have to be a partner in this because of their longstanding rule that they will not reopen borders. So in order to prepare the ground, if you will, it's important to look at where and how you have opportunities to raise this issue in the African Union mechanisms. And so getting there will be difficult, but it's going to be critical in the long run, because I can tell you that other potential allies, government of the United States or other governments, will be reluctant to take on the African Union directly if they are not willing to discuss this issue. The United Nations, of course, has many different avenues and will be a valuable ally for providing in creating spaces, creating fora, creating mechanisms to discuss the conflict in Cameroon, to shine a spotlight on it and hopefully start some thinking about ways forward. And there, the approach has to be both through the General Assembly as well as through the Security Council. Again, I understand as an organization of governments, it creates a challenge when you are directly confronting a sitting government. But ultimately, it will be about building a constituency and advocating and highlighting the problems that exist. I'll be very frank, the United States government has long been a key partner with groups seeking conflict resolution in Africa. Unfortunately, at this particular moment, getting a hearing, if you will, or finding an entree into the U.S. government to become more directly involved in helping resolve the conflict in Cameroon is going to be very difficult. Not only are we on the verge of an election, as you all are well aware, which could mean a change in administration. Currently, there's very little interest by the Trump administration in issues in Africa. Now, it doesn't mean that one should not look for opportunities to meet with representatives of the U.S. government to make the point of concern about what is happening and what you are interested in seeing. It's absolutely critical. But I think the U.S., for the moment at least, is a bit on the sidelines and won't be the same champion that perhaps it could have been in the past, and hopefully will be again in the future. Now, the one difference there, the one exception to that is with the U.S. Congress. U.S. Congress is absolutely a place where there is always an open door. There are always members of Congress in both houses who are interested in Africa, are interested in human rights issues, are interested in conflict resolution. And if you look at things like the creation of South Sudan and the resolution of the Sudan conflict, the conflict in Darfur, issues in Somalia, the list goes on. Congress has always taken an interest and has also been a bit of a push on whatever administration is in office to advance issues, to raise concerns, to force action on policy, and to force action on resolving conflicts. It was the same case in Liberia, where there was, once the U.S. government decided that they needed to be engaged and were focused on this, it helped the process. So I would encourage your group when you have a clear idea of what you want and what your desires are and your message is, that you find ways to approach members of Congress through their staff, directly to members, to get that message across and to go back. But it will take time. I come back to this theme. It will take time to build that constituency. And finally, I think, media and non-governmental organizations, media ultimately is a critical piece of this, is finding ways to highlight the problem, to bring it into people's everyday awareness, and not just Cameroonian awareness, not just African awareness, but global awareness of the problem, of the atrocities that have happened, of the attacks that are ongoing, but not just that, offering solutions, offering a way and a path forward. So media can be a very important amplifier for the message, and ultimately will be very critical in building constituencies and coalitions, again, that you need to get either to a negotiating table, to get to a resolution, to get to whatever your end stage may be. So I'm going to close here with my sort of remarks and listen to your questions, which I hope will help direct this in a way that might be of more use to you. But the key points really is that you cannot win friends and influence on the process without some degree of internal unity and shared objective and a clear message. So that's something that is absolutely critical. And then external outreach is also absolutely necessary, because you cannot resolve those conflicts or find a solution without allies and friends who can help push the process forward. Patience is key. It will take time. There are no quick solutions to any of this. And part of this, I'll go back to the point I made earlier on. It's very important, although I know it's very difficult, to remove emotion from the issue. Because at the end of the day, that's not to say that people's feelings are not valid, but at the end of the day, one has to deal with facts and try to figure out how we can move things forward, or else no one will get anywhere. We will just sit around and share our concerns and our problems repeatedly. So thank you again for having me here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And on behalf of all the people of Southern Cameroon, we want to thank you for taking the time to come and educate us and have this exchange with us on how, and give us the opportunity to learn to forward our cause. We are now going to go into the Q&A session and take a few questions from the Secretariat, and then also open for an exchange with the floor. The first question, Your Excellency, which is on the screen. You mentioned the achievements of the Ethiopian diaspora. What key lesson can we learn from the Ethiopian experience that would be most applicable to our situation? You're muted.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. The Ethiopian diaspora is highly organized and very vocal. They are always present in Washington, whether through peaceful protests in front of the Department of State, constant discussion and outreach with Congress, meeting with staff, meeting with members, And I think just the way that they have been able over the course of the last 20 years to drive US government decisions and on policy towards Ethiopia has been very, very important. So I think it just underscores the necessity for creating a forum where people can come together and express their views, but ultimately creating that message of what they want to deliver and finding those allies like US Congress, like the US government, like non-governmental organizations, and in the media to make their points. And I think, you know, they were very successful even in the days before social media came online. So it's really about identifying the key points and having a message. So I think, you know, there's nothing to stop Cameroonian diaspora from being able to do the similar thing. Not just, you know, talk among yourselves about the problems, but look for those opportunities to cast a wider spotlight.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The next question, Your Excellency. What would you recommend as the path of least resistance for Southern Cameroonians to get standing within international organizations such as the AU? The path of least resistance.
I think that the initial path has to be through the African Union Commission as opposed to the African Union, which is the body, you know, which has the heads of state. The Commission, which acts as more as a secretariat for the African Union, is the one that has has the structures such as the Peace and Security Council that is set up and designed to address issues of conflict and threats to stability and threats to security on the continent. And so trying to, you know, have people in Addis to meet with representatives of the council, to look for fora where you can share concerns in order to get it onto the discussion, get it onto the agenda for discussion, and at least have an acknowledgement that there is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. There are, you know, obviously within the African Union, it isn't easy, because as a group of governments and as a group of, you know, a conclave of heads of state, it becomes difficult. But the trick is perseverance, is going back, again, having a clear message, and refusing to give up. So looking for those entry points through the structures of the AU to try to get the conflict in Cameroon and the condition of Southern Cameroonians onto the table, onto the discussion table is important. There cannot be, I mean, the African Union has to acknowledge that there's an ongoing problem in Cameroon. They can't just pretend that none of this has happened over the last several years. Again, having advocates and having leaders within your own group that can be articulate and raise the awareness of the problem is going to be important.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The next question. From your presentation, it's clear you have been a keen observer of our liberation movement. In what areas, if any, do you think we have been doing well? And where do you think we need to improve on?
The key point is that there needs to be, you know, how do I say it? The best way to say this is really to find those key kernels of what the overall objective and final endpoint is going to be. And then what are options that can get you to that point. So I think part of the issue is going to be a further distilling and unification of views, because I know that not everybody is in the same place, and that's not unusual in situations like this, because there's or it's easy to stand up and say, well, we just want this, we want to be independent, we want to be our own country, and there's nothing, that's fine, but what does that mean in all of its details? How do you get there? What needs to happen first? Because none of this will happen overnight, and it's not going to be like one day you're here and the next day you're over here. There will have to be steps. There will have to be ways. There will have to be interactions with the existing government. And that is, I know, not always something that people want to accept. But whether the interactions doesn't mean necessarily even negotiations. It doesn't necessarily even mean agreement. But it means that to create a new reality, there will have to be interactions between both sides. And there is where it becomes very important that there be unity of effort, unity of message, unity of ideas, and some civil discussion, which is very difficult, I realize, in a situation where there has been violence and horrible things done. But ultimately, to make progress, you have to focus on the facts and focus on what's achievable in any given time frame.
Okay, the next question is a two-part question, Your Excellency. If you want, I could, let me just read both and then you could take them. Are the facts in Southern Cameroon's history adequate to secure alliances and international support for a sovereign state? And the second question, what are the key milestones in the process of securing international recognition of the sovereignty independence of the Southern Cameroons? So those are two questions.
I think the two of them are somewhat related, so I will try to sort of answer both of them, maybe not because it's kind of hard to separate one from the other. But I want to be clear that the creation of a new state, of a new independent state, is a difficult mountain to climb. Again, not because people might not be sympathetic to the issue, sympathetic to the cause, but the reality is that having a new entity, is it an entity that ultimately can be economically viable? Is it an entity that can provide for its people, that can control its territory? So that's the sort of big picture issue. The smaller picture issue, if you will, but in many ways, one of the most insurmountable ones, goes back to the point I made earlier on about the African Union's sort of rule that reopening old borders, reopening colonial borders, reopening all of that would be a can of worms they don't want to go down, and that they are very reluctant to endorse a situation where a new country, where new lines are drawn, although not that you're drawing a new line necessarily from Southern Cameroon, because there was a line initially when the Federation came together, right? But because there are so many there's so many potential problems that arise if it happens in one space, in one country. What happens in another country where you have multiple groups who want to have self-determination, who want to move towards independence? And so there's a concern that it will make spaces completely ungovernable. Now, that doesn't mean that it's absolute, because you look at the long negotiations related to Sudan and ultimately the comprehensive peace agreement that brought that ended the fighting in the country and ultimately led to the referendum on independence for South Sudan. And so, you know, ultimately everyone, including the African Union, agreed to that. There's an ongoing issue with Somaliland versus Somalia, for example. Somaliland has claimed its own independence while the rest of Somalia was in such chaos, and yet the African Union has been reluctant to acknowledge that they are truly an independent entity. And so that's been an ongoing discussion for a number of years. So it's a hard issue to pursue, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. But again, I go back to the point of having a clear vision of what that means, what that would look like, and then finding those allies, first casting a spotlight on the problem, raising the profile of the issue, getting attention to finding a process that could help lead to that, because it will have to be a process, whether it's something that is similar to the referendum that took place with South Sudan, or whether there's some other mechanism that can be used, is something that has to be looked at. So I think the possibility exists, but it has to be, you have to find those external allies. You need to have some organization, self-organization, some clear leadership, and then go out and make the case to some of those allies that are potential allies that I mentioned. So starting with the media, starting with potentially non-governmental organizations, looking at bilateral governments and looking at those international organizations like the UN and their mechanisms, or the African Union, will be critical.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Secretariat, okay, let's take this one. France is a permanent member of the Security Council and has a stranglehold on many of the Francophone African countries who make up the AU, including its current leadership. France is also a major cause of the Southern Cameroon's plunder. How do we engage the other members of the UN and AU to support our just quest for self-determination?
Well, I think, again, I go back to the point I keep making, is organize yourself and then go and talk to people. So you need to talk to representatives of other governments. And I would say, you know, I get, you know, France is definitely an issue, given its, excuse me, its long-term interest in Francophone Africa over the years. But I would argue that a lot of the bigger challenge within the AU context, in any case, is really the heads of state themselves, the African heads of state themselves, not so much these external partners. So while France can be an issue within the context of the United Nations, I think it's highly unlikely that they don't frequently exercise their veto. And it doesn't mean that you can't go and talk to other countries that have seats on the Security Council, because there are the permanent members, but there are also the rotating members who are on the Security Council. But looking through the General Assembly is also critical, which broadens the number of countries that you can talk to. So you have this sort of broader international structure within the UN, and yes, there are ways to work with other countries, and some of those other countries, including some of the EU member states, are perfectly willing to pressure other members like France or others if they decide that there's a better way to achieve, to solve, that there's a way forward to solve a problem. Within the AU, the bigger challenge is really less France so much or other external actors, and much more the African leaders themselves' reluctance to push too hard on one another. But what is key is, to the extent that it's possible to do that, to find potential other AU members who might be willing to at least look at the issue, or alternatively, as I said, looking at the African Union mechanisms, the secretariat mechanisms like the Peace and Security Council, where their job is to highlight issues that exist, the problems that exist on the continent, and to bring them forward for discussion.
Thank you, Your Excellency.